Reports are emerging that a rift is widening amid growing tension between Prince Harry and King Charles.
The request did not arrive as an apology, a private appeal, or an offer of reconciliation. It arrived carrying the name of a dead prince and a title the palace believed had been placed permanently beyond Harry's reach. When Charles read the proposed announcement, his expression hardened. His son was not merely asking to return. He was attempting to force open a royal door by invoking Prince Philip's legacy, and the king saw it as an unforgivable act of pressure. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles sat alone inside his study at Clarence House, reading the page. The Duke of Edinburgh is a royal title granted by the sovereign, carrying duties, prestige, and a link to Prince Philip. Harry's proposal did not request a symbolic mention. It demanded recognition as the new holder, claiming his bond with his grandfather gave him a moral right to inherit its meaning. The king removed his glasses and placed them beside the document. He did not speak. That silence carried more danger than a shouted refusal, because the Edinburgh dukedom had already been entrusted elsewhere in the family. Reversing that decision would not simply reward Harry. It would weaken Charles's authority, insult those who remained in service, and suggest palace decisions could be overturned through pressure. Harry's submission went further. Attached to it was a prepared public statement, ready for release if the palace refused to answer. The document implied that Philip had wanted his grandson to carry the Edinburgh legacy, and that the monarchy was denying a promise made in private. A documented account from Harry's advisors called the statement a necessary safeguard. Charles saw a threat. Then one sentence changed the room. The title, it claimed, should return to the grandson most capable of carrying Philip's independent spirit. Charles picked up a pen and circled those words slowly. To him, the line did not honor his father. It used a dead man's reputation to judge the living, especially William and Edward, who had continued serving without demanding reward. Charles reached for the telephone and summoned William. The prince arrived to find the proposal closed on the desk, and his father standing beside it, controlled but deeply wounded. The king ordered that no one in the wider household be told until they discovered who had helped construct the demand. Then he gave one instruction. Nobody was to contact Harry before he did. But when William opened the folder and saw the name intended beneath the Edinburgh title, the appeal became something far more dangerous. A battle over memory, legitimacy, and control. For Charles, the proposal is an attack on his authority. For William, it feels like something even more painful, a rewriting of the grandfather he knew. Yet Harry views the same title as a final bridge back to the family that closed its doors against him. Three men are now staring at the same royal name and seeing three entirely different promises. Behind the constitutional argument lies a far more dangerous conflict. Each believes Prince Philip would have understood him best. William kept reading, but his expression had already changed. The Prince of Wales, the formal title given to the heir to the throne, understood that royal positions could not be claimed through emotion alone. They were granted by the sovereign and supported by years of visible service. If Charles surrendered now, every future family dispute could become a campaign fought through public pressure. The king saw the same danger. Harry was not simply asking for a name. He was seeking a historic identity, powerful enough to restore his importance without returning beneath William's future authority. The Edinburgh connection could give him recognition, influence, and a platform linked directly to Philip's reputation for courage and independence. William stopped at one paragraph. Harry's written argument claimed their grandfather had privately viewed him as the grandson most capable of continuing his work. The future king read the sentence again, then looked toward Charles with cold disappointment. He did not see grief in those words. He saw an attempt to turn a private bond into proof of royal entitlement. Harry felt something very different. During a recorded telephone conversation with a longtime friend, he admitted that returning as a defeated younger son felt impossible. He could not walk back through palace doors asking for mercy, while everyone treated his departure as failure. He needed a role large enough to show that leaving had not erased his value. The proposal then quoted a private Windsor conversation. Philip had supposedly told him, "You will always have to make your own road." Harry presented those words as support for an independent royal future, one built outside the control of the central household. William remembered the same story, but not the same meaning. In a documented account shared with Charles after Philip's death, he recalled that the remark had been a warning. Freedom demanded discipline. Independence carried consequences. It was never a promise of rank, privilege, or succession to a title. Charles closed the file. He now understood that the disagreement could not remain between two sons. Edward's position had been placed directly under threat, and silence would make him appear weak or disposable. The king ordered that Edward come alone before sunset. He expected a legal discussion. Instead, Charles was about to reveal that Harry's campaign had begun months earlier, during a ceremony no one recognized as the point of no return. The palace later traced the crisis back to one precise afternoon at Windsor Castle. The occasion appeared harmless, a small military commemoration honoring Prince Philip's charitable and naval work. Yet one empty chair, one carefully chosen speech, and one private exchange after the ceremony transformed Harry's grief into a plan. What happened in that corridor did not create his longing to return. It convinced him that Philip's legacy could become the instrument through which he challenged the royal settlement itself. Harry had received limited permission from Charles to attend the gathering 6 months before submitting his proposal. A royal commemoration is a formal event created to honor a person's service and public contribution. This one carried unusual weight, because it connected Philip's memory to the future of his charities, military ties, and family responsibilities. Edward stood at the center of the program. He was publicly introduced as the guardian of his father's continuing legacy, then delivered the main address before meeting naval representatives linked to Philip's former patronages. Those patronages were organizations that had received a royal figure's public support. Harry's name appeared only inside a brief family acknowledgement. Harry sat in the second row and said nothing. His shoulders remained rigid as Edward spoke about duty, endurance, and service without reward. The younger brother watched each handshake that followed and felt his own connection to Philip being reduced to a line in the printed order. The silence broke near the Waterloo chamber. Harry confronted a senior household official and demanded to know why he had not been invited to speak about his grandfather. The courtier answered carefully but firmly. Royal legacy followed present service, not personal closeness. Harry heard rejection, not procedure. To him, the statement meant the institution had erased years of private affection because he no longer served inside its structure. Edward approached him beside the castle staircase and asked for a quiet conversation, but Harry refused. He told his uncle there was nothing left to discuss and walked away before the reception ended. Harry paused before leaving and turned back toward the official. He claimed Philip had once believed the Edinburgh name should remain connected to a royal willing to operate beyond convention. A documented account later prepared for Charles identified that sentence as the first moment Harry directly linked himself to the dukedom. The campaign began soon afterward. A former constitutional consultant contacted Harry through a recorded telephone conversation and explained that he could not legally seize a dukedom because such titles are granted by the sovereign. But he could make refusal emotionally and publicly costly. Drafts started circulating under the phrase, "the Philip settlement." Harry collected recollections, charitable endorsements, and fragments of private family conversations. By the time Charles discovered them, the request was no longer an impulsive plea. It was the final move in a deliberate campaign, and the king decided his son would hear the answer face to face. There are no secretaries in the room, no lawyers at the table, and no palace official available to soften what follows. Charles stands beside the fireplace as Harry enters carrying a slim leather folder. Neither man reaches for the other. For several seconds, father and son simply stare across the distance between them. Then Harry places Philip's name on the table, and the king's restraint finally breaks under the weight of grief, anger, and accumulated disappointment. Harry opened the folder and began without apology. He argued that an Edinburgh role would let him support veterans, youth programs, and international service without competing directly with William. The dukedom, a royal title granted by the sovereign and tied to public duty, could become a bridge between his independent life and the family he had left behind. Charles listened without moving. Harry called the plan a compromise, but the king heard a demand dressed as reconciliation. Accepting it would overturn Edward's position, weaken the authority of the crown, and allow one son to return through pressure rather than trust. The father inside him wanted peace. The monarch inside him saw danger. Harry pressed harder. He said Philip would have understood the need for a different kind of royal service, one less controlled by palace tradition. Charles pushed his chair backward and rose. His voice remained low, but every word struck with force. His father's memory, he said, was not a weapon to be pointed at the crown. Harry's control cracked. He accused the family of using duty to justify rejection, while still praising his military service whenever it suited the monarchy. The Duke said Charles did not want reconciliation. He wanted obedience, silence, and a son willing to return without dignity. The king flinched, but he did not step back. Charles demanded the prepared announcement. Harry hesitated before handing it over. A public statement is an official message written for release to the media, and this one claimed discussions over the Edinburgh title had already reached an advanced stage. The wording made refusal look like a sudden betrayal rather than the rejection of a demand never accepted. The king read the sentence twice. Then he asked who had supplied the language about Philip's wishes. Harry resisted, but the silence became unbearable. At last, he admitted through a recorded account of the meeting that a member of the extended royal household had given his advisor access to an old briefing note. Charles understood the scale of the breach immediately. Someone inside the family structure had provided private material and allowed Harry's team to turn unfinished language into leverage. The king closed the folder and slid it back across the table. The title, he said, would never be used to purchase Harry's return. Then he ordered William into the room. Harry expected his brother to attack, but the final power did not rest with William alone, and the man whose title was under threat had remained silent until now. Edward does not arrive carrying anger. He arrives carrying the burden of a promise already accepted. While others speak of the Edinburgh title as a prize, he has spent years treating it as an obligation shaped by Philip's example. Yet the crisis forces him into a position he never wanted. He must either defend his place or appear willing to surrender his father's legacy. His answer comes without shouting, but it leaves Harry with less room to maneuver than Charles's fury ever could. Charles welcomed his brother into the private study and closed the door himself. The crown meant the sovereign's legal and symbolic authority to grant titles, duties, and official standing. The king possessed that power, but Edward carried something more personal. Years of service tied directly to the charities, military links, and public responsibilities associated with Edinburgh. Edward understood that the dukedom was not family property waiting for the loudest claimant. It was a royal responsibility, granted by the sovereign to support long-term duty. He had accepted the role quietly, knowing it came with expectations rather than freedom. Harry's proposal now threatened to turn that obligation into a prize fought over through pressure. Edward sat opposite Charles and struggled to keep his voice steady. He admitted that the campaign had made years of loyalty feel strangely fragile, as though service without protest could be erased by one emotional claim backed by public attention. The younger brother hated sounding defensive, but he could not pretend the attack had not wounded him. Charles listened as Edward's restraint began to crack. Yet his brother did not ask for revenge. He asked the king not to humiliate Harry in public. Philip, he said, had despised family self-pity and would never have wanted his name used to destroy one son in order to protect another. Edward then opened a sealed envelope. Inside rested a private memorandum prepared after discussions concerning the title's future. A memorandum is a written record used to preserve decisions, advice, and agreed intentions. This one stated that the Edinburgh role should remain linked to active, Crown-directed service within the United Kingdom. The decisive sentence came near the end. The document contained no promise to Harry, and no support for an independent royal household operating overseas. A documented palace account confirmed that Philip's name had been discussed only in connection with service under the sovereign, not as a foundation for a separate court. Charles read the restriction twice. Harry's emotional argument collapsed in silence. The king still refused to punish him through public cruelty, but the prepared announcement had falsely suggested that negotiations were advanced, and that crossed another line. Charles ordered a review of every remaining privilege that allowed Harry to appear semi-official. The Edinburgh claim died inside that room, yet the wider consequences were already moving beyond it, and Harry was about to discover how much access could vanish through one royal command. The first consequence is not announced with trumpets or delivered before cameras. It arrives through silence. A familiar contact no longer answers. A planned charitable reception disappears from the calendar. Then a formal message confirms that the palace will not permit Harry to use royal residences, household staff, or ceremonial associations to support an independent Edinburgh campaign. Sitting alone after reading it, he finally understands that Charles is not negotiating the terms of his return. He is dismantling the route entirely. Harry stared at the message on his phone and read it again. Informal palace assistance meant the quiet support normally offered behind the scenes, including briefing staff, ceremonial planning, and meetings presented under a royal family connection. Charles had now suspended all of it. What once looked like limited access had become a closed door. The household moved quickly. A short public statement confirmed that the Edinburgh title and its responsibilities remained unchanged. It mentioned no negotiations, no inheritance claim, and no alternative role for Harry. That mattered, because silence on those points destroyed the impression that his proposal had ever been close to approval. Harry lowered the phone and did not move. He had expected resistance, perhaps even anger, but not the complete rejection of the identity he hoped to rebuild. The title had offered him more than status. It had offered proof that leaving the monarchy had not erased his place inside its history. Charles felt no victory. Standing alone near a photograph of Philip, he admitted to Camilla that fury had been easier than the sadness that followed. The Queen Consort listened as he confessed that protecting the institution had once again required him to wound his son. She reminded him that refusing pressure was not the same as refusing love, but the king remained unconvinced. The internal review then uncovered the source. A documented palace account identified the household contact who had given Harry's advisor an outdated briefing note from early discussions about the Edinburgh arrangement. The language had never been a promise from Philip. It had been a draft written before the final decision was settled. The deeper shock came from what had been removed. Harry's team had received a shortened version that excluded a later paragraph rejecting any overseas or commercially independent use of the title. The edit made his case appear stronger, cleaner, and more legitimate than it truly was. Charles responded with one final offer. Harry could meet him again as his son, without advisors, demands, prepared statements, or discussion of titles. The invitation promised no restoration and no official role. With the campaign defeated and his royal strategy stripped away, Harry faced the choice he had avoided for years, whether he wanted a relationship with his father or merely a position beside the crown. Harry returns without the leather folder. Charles arrives without a private secretary. For the first time since the dispute began, neither man has a document capable of protecting him from the conversation. The Edinburgh title is not placed on the table because the king has already decided its fate. What remains is more difficult. A father who believes his son used Philip's memory against him, and a son forced to admit that the demand was driven by fear of becoming permanently irrelevant. Charles sits across from Harry at Windsor, with no aides, lawyers, advisors, or family intermediaries present. A private secretary is the senior official who manages a royal figure's schedule, correspondence, and formal decisions. This time, the monarch has deliberately removed every institutional barrier. Only 2 chairs, untouched tea, and Philip's naval photograph remain between them. The king begins with a boundary. The Edinburgh proposal will never be revived. Harry cannot connect himself publicly to the title, suggest future negotiations, or use Philip's name to create an alternative royal office outside the palace. Charles speaks calmly, because anger has already failed them both. The decision is final, but the relationship does not have to end with it. Harry lowers his eyes and finally admits what the campaign was really protecting. Returning without status felt like returning in defeat. Asking simply to see his father seemed more humiliating than demanding a role supported by history, public sympathy, and his grandfather's memory. The Duke confesses that he feared becoming irrelevant, not only to the monarchy, but to the family itself. Charles absorbs the words in silence. Then he reveals, through a documented account of the private meeting, that the deepest betrayal was never the challenge to his authority. It was the portrayal of Philip as a man who would reward division. The king's voice softens as he remembers a father who valued endurance above applause and service above personal recognition. Harry does not defend the prepared announcement. For the first time, he accepts that it crossed a line by suggesting the palace had secretly considered his claim. He admits the wording was designed to make rejection appear cruel and sudden. Charles hears responsibility where he once heard only defiance. The king refuses official restoration, but he offers something smaller and more honest: direct communication, carefully planned family visits, and a promise that private conversations will never become public weapons. Harry accepts the limits without bargaining. Charles rises first and extends his hand. Harry hesitates, then takes it. He leaves without a title, yet not entirely without hope. Their private exchange cannot erase the crisis. Outside Windsor, the story is already breaking, and the public will soon decide whether Harry's failed claim was courage, desperation, or manipulation. By sunrise, a private royal struggle has become a national spectacle. Broadcasters speak of legacy. Commentators speak of entitlement. Supporters describe a wounded grandson reaching for the one figure who understood him, while critics see an attempt to seize status through emotional blackmail. Yet one image captures the story more powerfully than any debate: the gates of Windsor beneath a newspaper headline, declaring that Philip's name had been dragged into the final battle between Charles and Harry. Buckingham Palace releases a firm statement before the morning broadcasts begin. The palace is the monarch's official household and public voice, used to confirm decisions made in the sovereign's name. Its message leaves no space for interpretation. The Duke of Edinburgh's position is settled, and no talks have taken place over a transfer, shared title, or alternative appointment for Harry. Television panels divide almost immediately. Some commentators argue that Harry was searching for meaningful service through his grandfather's legacy. Others say he tried to bypass royal authority by creating pressure outside the family. Charles is praised for defending the crown, yet the king is also accused of closing another door on his son. A small crowd gathers outside Windsor Castle by midday. Several supporters carry old photographs of Philip and Harry together. One woman tells a broadcaster during a recorded street interview that the younger prince should not need a title to prove he loved his grandfather. Her words spread quickly because they turn a constitutional struggle into something painfully human. Edward faces the same tension during a scheduled charitable visit. A reporter asks whether the crisis has damaged the family. He pauses before answering, visibly uncomfortable but controlled. Philip's legacy, he says, belongs to service rather than competition. The Duke repeats that message when another question follows, refusing to attack Harry while quietly defending the role he already carries. Then one front page takes control of the story. A London newspaper prints an image of Harry walking alone beneath the headline, "No title, no return. King ends Philip claim." The words become the public symbol of his defeat. They make the decision look final, cold, and deeply personal. Public opinion begins to shift when a documented palace account reveals that Charles offered a private relationship while refusing official restoration. The king had not banished his son completely. He had drawn a hard line between family reconciliation and royal power. Harry's advisors urge him to challenge the statement before silence becomes surrender. He refuses. Instead, he orders the prepared Edinburgh announcement withdrawn, knowing another attack would destroy the fragile opening his father has left. The public battle ends without a final accusation. Harry's silence leaves the monarchy to deliver its verdict through what each man chooses next. In the end, Harry does not become the Duke of Edinburgh. Charles does not restore him to royal service, and the crown does not surrender to a campaign built around grief. Yet the final meaning of the crisis is not found in the title that was refused. It is found in what remained after the demand collapsed. A father who defended the monarchy, a son who finally separated reconciliation from status, and Philip's memory released from a struggle it was never meant to carry. Charles signs the final household direction without hesitation. A household direction is a formal instruction entered into the palace record, so royal staff know exactly what decision must be followed. The document confirms that the Edinburgh title will remain untouched, and that no future application from Harry will be considered. Nothing is left open to interpretation. Harry's advisors begin dismantling the campaign immediately. They withdraw the proposed statement, cancel the charitable launch connected to the Edinburgh identity, and remove every suggestion that negotiations with the crown ever took place. The plan that once looked capable of forcing open a royal door disappears in silence. Edward seeks closure in a different way. He returns to Philip's former working room and places the disputed memorandum back inside its archive box. An archive is the protected collection where important royal records are preserved. The Duke feels relief that his position is secure, but sorrow that his father's name became the center of a contest among people who all believed they were defending him. Charles studies an old family photograph and accepts a painful truth. Protecting Harry from every consequence would not repair their bond. It would only teach his son that pressure carried no cost. By refusing the title while preserving a private path, the king has chosen boundaries over abandonment. Harry then makes his final move. In a handwritten message, he tells Charles that he will never raise the Edinburgh claim again. He does not apologize for loving Philip. He apologizes for turning that love into leverage against his father, and for allowing grief to become a public weapon. Charles answers personally, rather than through the household. His message offers no office, security guarantee, money, title, or ceremonial role. It contains only a date for another private meeting between father and son. The verdict is complete. Harry's attempt fails, because royal belonging cannot be rebuilt through a borrowed title. Charles proves that Philip's legacy belongs to duty, not pressure. Edward's place remains secure, the crown remains intact, and Harry finally understands the difference between being welcomed as family and being restored as royalty. Philip's name returns to history rather than conflict. Harry loses the title he tried to claim, but by surrendering it, he preserves the last fragile possibility of recovering his father. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.